I would like to thank our partners that extended their support to this event. Associate partners MENA Clean Energy Business Council, CITA EV Charger, who is also the panel sponsor on day one. Supporting associations: the European Association for Electromobility, Electric Drive Transportation Association, Electric Vehicle Association of Thailand. And the supporting partners: Qatar Solar Energy, Fin Value, Electroheads, the Brattle Group, Rare Group, A Great E Incorporated, and our media partner, Circuit Digest.
As smart as you, we have made a smart charging companion for your EV. Say hello to the award-winning CITA Smart 7. An incredible high-performance home charger. Here's why Smart 7 is incredible. It fits compactly and pairs easily with the residential grid. Plugs into any Type 2 of EV and gives a maximum power of up to 7.2 kilowatts for single-phase installation. It also balances the power to your home by safely managing the electrical load. A capability to harness solar power as a source of energy to charge your EV. An ingenious mobile app that can also automate the charging schedule of your EV as per your convenience. You could look at the charger's smart analysis anytime on the app. Just pair it with your Wi-Fi and manage everything on the mobile app, or you can always command it with access cards. A cutting-edge, award-winning EV charger. CITA Smart 7. Not just a charger, a leap towards sustainability.
Thank you for the kind introductions. And I think given the fact that we are here for the Qatar EV conference, and given the fact that most of us are not in that region, I thought it might make sense that, Akin, if maybe you could give us a brief overview of the region and how an infrastructure rollout looks in the region at the minute. And that may allow us to bring in some expertise and thoughts from across Europe and the UK with myself and Dan, and potentially across the Thailand option right now for Dr. Amornrat. So Akin, can you maybe give us a brief overview of how you feel the infrastructure sits right now in the GCC region?
Sure, no problem at all, Ian. Can you hear me okay, first of all?
Yeah, we can hear you clear.
Yeah, perfect. Okay, great. Well, I think the key word there is I can give you a view of kind of my feelings about the rollout of EV infrastructure across the region. I should say that I think our first presentation that was part of the session today was from Ahmed Al-Barali, who actually, as part of his presentation, he put up one slide, which was very good, and that captured the sort of status of EV rollouts across many of the GCC countries. So I won't repeat what he said, as that captures some of the numbers and some of the figures quite nicely. But I can certainly give you my feeling as somebody who's lived in the region for well over 12 years now. I spent 9 years living in Qatar, so I know that market pretty well, and now the last 3 years living in the UAE, but traveling extensively across the whole GCC country. And I would say that from experience, the rollout of EV infrastructure has been fairly lumpy across the region, with the UAE and probably Dubai taking the major lead. So here in the UAE, we've got roughly 300 publicly available charging stations, which have been relatively strategically placed across the network and the major cities, so that you're never more than about 130 kilometers away from a charging station. That sounds like quite a lot, but I think most of them are fairly concentrated in the cities, with some strategically placed along the major highways. I'd say that's probably quite a way ahead of many of the other GCC countries, including Qatar. That doesn't mean to say, however, that you won't see many EV cars on the roads. And one of the features of this market is, for certain parts of the population, they're what you might call early adopters. So even in Dubai, you'll have seen EV cars on the road, largely Teslas, has to be said, 4 or 5 years ago, where people have gone out and bought vehicles for their own personal use, and of course have bought their own sort of charging stations or charging infrastructure for use at home. So EVs are starting to pick up across the region, I say more so in the UAE than perhaps anywhere else. I think the other major driver for EV use across the region, and therefore infrastructure, although not necessarily public, is the shift towards publicly funded vehicles. So in the UAE and Dubai, a few years ago, many of you will know that Dubai purchased a fleet of 200 Teslas for use as their airport taxis. So if you fly into Dubai airport, the chances are you could be picked up by a Tesla taxi outside there. And of course, there's the EV charging infrastructure for those, although albeit not publicly available. And also the start of the shift towards government fleets using electric vehicles. And again, many of the large government departments are starting to invest in electrifying their fleets. So we'll also be investing in charging infrastructure for those. And that's happening not just in the UAE, but more broadly as well. So, including places like Oman. I think the sort of major accelerations of the uptake of both EVs and charging infrastructure is likely to happen in Saudi. It's the biggest market by far out here, and they're making EVs, particularly for some of their new developments, whether it's places like Neom or the Red Sea or some of the other gigacities, which are going to be EV only developments, and they're huge. So I think we'll see a rapid expansion of EV infrastructure going into Saudi Arabia, as initially in some of the new developments, but then that, of course, will propagate out into the other cities as well. One word of caution, though, I would say, that especially in places like the UAE, there's a huge expansion of residential infrastructure being built here. And one word of caution is that I think my experience is that we're still not seeing the number of sort of EV infrastructure investments being made into some of those residential investments that you would necessarily like to see, given this has been coming for a few years now. But I'm sure that will change moving forward. But I would say, yeah, Dubai, UAE leading the way. Other countries a bit lumpy, but Saudi following up very, very quickly, fast.
So some of the first-hand experience. So CITA have an office, a regional office in Dubai. And I certainly know that in terms of infrastructure adoption, some policy changes are happening or have recently happened, which means that there's not so much of a centralisation of the ability to sell power or to sell electricity. So until we have countries that have a policy that allow charge point operators or individuals to be able to sell that power, there's only so much power that anyone can give away for free. So that would certainly drive it. Dan, if I can bring you in for a second, you and I briefly spoke just the other day regarding the chicken and egg scenario. And I know that plays fairly heavily into the kind of marketing side of things that you're heavily involved with. And some of the feedback that I have from my team in the Dubai region is that there's a perception of there potentially not being enough vehicles penetrating the market to create the charging infrastructure. But then do we have the chicken and egg scenario of the infrastructure isn't there, so the manufacturers are not putting the effort to deliver the vehicles into the region? Dan, you're on. You seem to be on mute just now, Dan. If you can unmute.
You think after 2 years I'd learn where the unmute button was, right?
That's better, yeah.
Yeah, you know what? My view is in working from a advertising, brand, and media perspective. So my start point is always thinking about audience and normal people, right? Normal people on the ground who use their purchase power to make choices in their life that support what they want to do. And that conversation we were having around the chicken egg is an interesting one. There's certainly been a big debate in the UK about whether there was enough product to drive the infrastructure decisions. I think the way I think about this is that really what we're looking at is kind of system change, and we are shifting systems, and some places are further ahead and some are further behind. But when you have system change, you've got a whole lot of behavioral change that needs to come along with it. And the key thing for me, and I've seen this very closely, I am an EV driver. I have solar panels on my house. I have a home battery that I use. So I'm very much in that kind of fairly early adopter, and I'm quite well progressed. But these decisions fundamentally have a few aspects to them. One is that there needs to be real commitment, and there are different stakeholder groups who need to show that commitment. And I was lucky enough to be hosting an event last week where I introduced the country chairman of Shell, and one of the things he was talking about was that fundamentally his business requires a mandate, often from the government, to go and make change. He needs a mandate from two places. He needs it from either the government and policymakers, or he needs a mandate from his shareholders and all customers. And so for me, that's one of the big questions is where is the commitment being shown? And there are certain stakeholder groups that are really driving that, and that they change, you know, depending on the cultural and organizational system. Then you've got different stakeholders who are really driving that. But the other thing, when you start to look at all of these things together, is that it's a game of confidence, right? When we are behavior changing, and when we are shifting from one place to another, we can only do that when we feel confident. And so I see actually the infrastructure debate, wherever you are, it's a conversation about confidence. What are my confidence levels in being able to make sure I can get what I need to do what I need to do? And I think that's a really interesting proposition, because confidence comes from a lot of things. You know, in the UK and across Europe, that marries that with North America in terms of the amount of investment by OEMs to make sure they're on the right side of the curve. Some are ahead, some are behind. But what you really get is this kind of, it's very much an integrated play, and the point at which you can start to see that more charging is available, when the infrastructure shifts, what you get are those kind of dynamics that help people feel more confident, and any consumer needs confidence to make the right choices. So I think it's a particularly fascinating thing, because we're in a systems change. With that, you've got behavior change. And when you've got behavior change, that's complex, because humans are complex. We make highly emotional decisions. We don't always make decisions that are rational. And I think that's a very interesting perspective to me, which is, you know, if you take the debate around charging infrastructure plus range anxiety, actually, the case for range anxiety isn't all that great. You know, on the whole, when you look at how far people commute, but the emotional issue of range anxiety is very deep. And when you have emotional issues, and by the way, I believe that we make far more emotional decisions than we'd like to believe.
Yeah.
They're very important to find ways of overcoming. So I as I say, I try and look at this from a kind of consumer layman's terms, but I think it's about confidence. We're in a systems change situation, and I also think it's, and I would say this, wouldn't I, because I'm an ad man and I believe in storytelling, but I think it's about the right people communicating properly. You know, we just in the way that we make decisions emotionally, we also make decisions on, you know, we're driven by stories, and we want to know what are these stories. And I think the brands that get it right, and Tesla has got it right in its own way, is it's
Absolutely.
told a very clear story. It's told a very clear story. And I think the communication aspect is always going to be important for anyone in this, whether you're a government or whether you're an OEM or whether you're a private business. It's about being able to communicate why you're doing this. So I think there's those to me are the things that leap out, that connect together.
Yeah, well, let's touch on. So you've mentioned government twice there whilst you were speaking, which I think is fairly important. So for me, I'm based in Glasgow, so I was bang in the centre of COP26 for the past 2 years, where we had the leaders of the world debating what they were going to do for carbon reduction and to help with climate change. And I think governments are probably absolutely key and central. And if I can bring Dr. Amornrat in, I believe that certainly you've been very close to some government projects within your region, and perhaps you could give us a bit of insight into how government affects those infrastructure projects and what influence they can have for positive, and if there's any problems there. The government involvement, does it create any issues?
Okay, thank you, Dan. I would like to explain about the project in Thailand, because in order to know about efficient rollout of EV charging infrastructure in Thailand, so I think the main thing to achieve the efficient rollout of EV charging infrastructure in Thailand, I think there are pilot projects from both government sector and private sector as well, and also standards of EV equipments, and also the promotion and or the policy from the government. I think there are three important things to achieve the efficient rollout of EV infrastructure. In Thailand, I think I am not sure about many countries knows about the pilot project in Thailand or not, but I would like to explain about the pilot project. Since 2016, from 2016, there are the charging station maybe less than 100 charging station in Thailand. So nowadays there are around more than 2,200 chargers, or around more than 600 charging station. So you can see the increasing of charging station in Thailand, right? So any other important things, I think it depends on standard of EV equipments in Thailand, such as, for example, socket, plug, or EV charger equipment, anything else of equipments, and also the promotion and policy from the government sector, because if the promotion or the policy from the government sector is close to the benefit of using about electric vehicle, so many people try to apply, try to use the new technology such as electric vehicle, and also for the technology of EV charging infrastructure as well.
Yeah. Okay, and Akin, I know that you've been heavily involved with the EU in terms of a lot of what's been happening in there. Is there anything that we're seeing, or that we see happening across the EU, that other governments should look at in terms of adoption? And I'm keen that we don't spend the entire time talking about it being a government responsibility, because I think commercial business has a responsibility. I think yeah, there's some responsibility in local government, but what about the involvement you've had with the EU in terms of this kind of EV rollout, or the infrastructure rollout?
Yeah, sure. I mean, what I should say is that, first of all, this is work that Ricardo's done, not me personally. So I'm sort of relaying the corporate experience rather than my own now, because obviously I'm not based in the EU. But what I would say is that some of the work we've done with the EU, I think, has proven just how difficult this area is to push forward on, because it's so complicated and there's so many moving parts to it. So even in an organization like the EU, which has a fairly wide span over what's happening in most of the member states, electric vehicles touches on many, many different parts of people's lives. So it's not just the vehicles, it's not just the charging infrastructure. Obviously, that has implications for electricity generation and pricing, and which we've heard plenty of this afternoon. But it also has implications for things like building standards as well. So if you're building new developments, how do you integrate that with what will be a huge explosion of EV vehicles? And as I said, we're not necessarily seeing that in this region. I think we may be starting to see it in Europe, but it's not self-evident. And there are also other considerations, such as sort of taxation implications as well. So I think one of the key findings from some of the European work is that the taxation for things like energy is not necessarily aligned with the rollout of EVs, and we know that with the reduction in taxation that many countries achieve from selling fossil fuels, where does that income come from? And I think these are all things that are starting to gain visibility, and they're starting to be thought about, but it's very difficult. I mean, I think that the parallel with this region, of course, is that we have a number of fairly closely linked states, just like the EU. And I think if the EU is struggling to get its hands around how you provide a sort of coordinated plan for the rollout of electric vehicles over the next 20, 30, 40 years. I think we can expect to see the same elsewhere in the world as well, including in the GCC.
Yeah. Okay, I'm kind of keen that we start to focus on the solution rather than just the problems that we have here. And I'm going to kind of throw something at all three of you guys and then take opinion on it. And this is based on experience that we're seeing in the UK. And that we see happening across Europe, and it's a bit of a focus on AC charging versus DC charging. So typically, we're a charge point manufacturer. We deal with charge point operators, end users, and we've started to look at some of our projects to say for the investment of one DC charger, we could roll out comfortably with our partners 7 dual 22 kilowatt AC chargers. So for the financial investment of one DC charger, where we can charge one car per hour and deliver 50 or 120 kilowatts per hour maximum, we essentially can roll out 14 AC 22 kilowatt charge points that are capable of charging 14 cars at one time and delivering 308 kilowatts per hour. And those smaller AC chargers allow us to spread the network far wider, far quicker. I personally think that that's a way that the UK will continue to develop its infrastructure. So do you guys have any thoughts on that at all? We understand there's a requirement for DC chargers because we do need to charge quickly at times, but should we have more of a focus on AC charging in our infrastructures across the countries and the regions that we're looking at? Anyone? Dan, do you fancy a comment on that?
I'm conscious that it's very easy to go, well, that really fits with my perspective of the world. And I will take with a pinch of salt the unconscious bias we might have on things like that. But genuinely, I think when and I'm not a behavioral economist, but I think when you're in this idea of systems change and as a consumer, you're looking for confidence, I think there is a numbers game at play. And one of the numbers game is about the number of charge points that surround me, because that density of charging infrastructure has an effect on how we feel about confidence. And so whilst you could definitely get to a mathematics perspective on that charging of DC, just today I was charging my car and exactly, I was in the position where actually I was in no rush. AC was perfect for my needs. And if there was an option of there being 6 more of those, I think that's where you get the tipping points of infrastructure that we need. And of course, I think also, someone mentioned this idea of it's also over what horizon are we thinking. The needs that are evident in the first 5 years of any disruption or any ecosystem change, they're going to be different to the next from 5 years to 10 years. Or 15. So I think we have to accept that the role of charging is going to change, both because we have to take into account the realities of where we are right now, but what's the if you think about this through what's the job to be done, the job to be done is to give confidence, and I think to that, I think that's why more distribution is disproportionately important at the beginning, because you're trying to overcome lots of inertia in different forms.
Yeah. And Dr. Amornrat, how do you feel? Do we need to charge very, very quickly with fewer chargers, or do we need to adopt the attitude that we will charge slower but have more chargers available?
So for normal charge in Thailand, I think from 5 years ago, I think around 22 kilowatts is enough for the normal charge. But until now, I think maybe more than 22 kilowatt is important for EV in this present, because not only the normal charger, but also the quick charger and the very quick and also fast charger is important for EV, because everyone needs to charge very quick as same as with the gas station, right?
Yeah.
So in a few minutes something. So
Yeah.
from the past some few years, around maybe more than 30 minutes or maybe more than 30 minutes is a very long time for a driver, right?
Yeah.
So from now, I think the technology of charger, quick charger, normal charger is very fast. I ever seen about the technology of normal charger and quick charger in many countries, but it's very fast to for the technology to apply many technology. For example, the heat cooling, for the fast charger, something is important for EV infrastructure as well. For example, in case of fast charger, it's necessary to use the substation to support the electricity, right? In Thailand, they try to support for the substation for the fast charger in the future. Now we try to study about the fast charger as well.
Yeah, yeah. Akin, let me come back to your work with Ricardo. So on that basis of that, to become a charge point operator, there doesn't have to be a huge investment from one fairly small 22 kilowatt charger. Potentially, should we as an industry, should we be encouraging more businesses to identify becoming a charge point operator or operating those charge points? Should we help them to identify that those become a source of revenue for that business, so that it opens up not just the big guys like Shell and BP that we all know and the big energy firms, but opens up a lot more SMEs, smaller businesses that could potentially become, even if they're a charge point operator only for their own premises, if it's a coffee shop or a hotel, do we need to encourage these people to look at EV charging adoption as a business model, not only to encourage more customers, but a way for them to generate revenue as they sell the energy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to Dan's point, you know, the sort of key to increasing EV adoption is giving users confidence, and that means rolling out, you know, EV charging points, you know, as much as we can at the moment. And I think that means that we need to take a much more kind of flexible approach to how we do that. Dipping back now a few years, I think I remember reading a report about one of the kind of the early stages of EV infrastructure rollout in the UK, and that seemed to be pointing, you know, very much towards the increased rollout of fast chargers over slow chargers. I think there was an implication that slow charging, you know, hadn't been successful, and I remember thinking that didn't necessarily square with what people were looking for. And I think it's very much dependent on use cases. So there will be a role for fast chargers if you're on a motorway network and you need to stop and get a sudden jolt of power. That's absolutely the right thing to do. But, you know, in residential areas, in workplaces or station car parks, let's say, where vehicles are going to be in the same place for a long period of time, then, you know, I would say that rolling out, you know, a much bigger network of slow chargers probably makes sense. And there may be places where you want to do both, and then perhaps you'll differentiate on pricing, where if someone just wants a quick top up, they're happy to pay a lower rate for a slow charger than somebody who, if they're going to be in a supermarket car park, let's say they're going to be there for an hour, you know, wants to fully charge their vehicle for an hour. Maybe you're prepared to pay a bit more for that. And I think it's these sort of flexibility of business models and business locations will be the thing that we can use to attract new players into the marketplace and say, you know, there is no one size fits all. And if you can identify a market, if you can identify a need, then by all means, you know, please see if you can exploit that. And I think that'll be the thing that will drive, you know, an increase in number of private companies into this marketplace, is making sure that they're able to identify and tap into those user needs. Yeah.
So that's probably something else to have a think about then, in terms of, for an efficient rollout of an EV charging infrastructure, where do we expect that investment to come from? So where does, Dan, if you think about, you're very much in touch with public opinion, does public opinion expect government to pick up the tab here and roll it out? Are they expecting the large private companies and other organisations to come in and pick up the tab and then make a profit against the EV charging user. So when we're charging, we know that we're paying more per kilowatt when we're charging in the public infrastructure versus when we charge at home or potentially at the workplace. So where does the public think that the buck stops here to get the infrastructure to in a position where adoption of the cars is okay?
Yeah, I mean, I think as ever in these things, and it's complex, isn't it? You know, unbelievably complex, and it's about where I think ultimately the consumer probably doesn't care. You know, the consumer rarely cares about these things. They just want it how they need it, right? Because that's not their problem to solve. One of the things, but one of the things that I think the panel's touched on is that it's often either intended or unintended consequences of other decisions that have an impact. So, you know, things around taxation, of course, make a massive perspective. Now, someone on the ground, you know, a layman on the ground has no perspective on that. I think what they are looking for, and this is something that I feel both strongly about, but I see very clearly, particularly because of I'm London based, COP26 has just happened, and therefore I'm having lots of discussions around actually what is the headline policy and what's driving it. And I think that's the other thing that really matters, which is actually, rather than just seeing electrification as a thing that is going to happen, albeit it is a thing that is going to happen, what's the big driver of that? Is it really about what's the question that we're asking? Is the question that we're asking about a more sustainable future, or is it about a more efficient mobility system? And those, depending on what the higher order question is, you might get to a different perspective. You know, to answer your question, I think ultimately consumers aren't really bothered where the buck stops, but I think they you know, they want to make sure it works. And I think, you know, even now you will have experience of this, that my business is about being evangelical about the future of mobility. That's what we do. But there are times when, you know, I'll pull up at a charger and it just doesn't work. And you think, how long has that not worked for? And some of these problems can be, you know, back to the confidence thing. You kind of think, crikey, I thought we were over something like that. I've managed to locate a charger and now it doesn't work, whether that's AC or DC. So that it's finely balanced, I think, you know, and there are lots of, you know, as ever on these things, and this isn't to be pessimistic, but there are always other voices at play. There are other stakeholders that have you know, that they might have a business model which is anchored in how things are right now, and that can be difficult. But I think consumers are, the way that we talk about it from Electroheads is that we believe pretty much everybody now, from a consumer point of view, is what we call electro-curious. They are fundamentally, particularly in Europe, in Northern America and the UK, they are fundamentally interested in what an electric mobility future looks like. For some of those, that is here already, and for some of them it's probably 5 years away. But there are conversations happening that just weren't happening even 18 months ago, and that's another thing that you know, to my earlier point around, you know, people being storytellers, the more conversation that exists in just normal people's lives, that creates a different dynamism. The last speaker was talking about things being exciting, and it needs to be exciting too. You know, nothing got done because it was boring. Things get done because we feel they're going to be better than how things were. So that also has to play, I think.
So I'm conscious of the fact that we will be wrapping up soon. So I think I probably want us all to give a bit of a statement on what we think needs to be done better on infrastructure adoption and rolling it out across our regions that we know. So Dr. Amornrat, what do you think we need to do better to roll out the EV charging infrastructure? Is there something that as an entire world we're doing wrong right now? Is there a particular region that's doing it well? Is there anything that you could say, you know what, if we could do just one thing differently, what can we do to make it better for rolling out the EV charging infrastructure?
Okay, so I think how to adopt EV charger in everywhere, not in Thailand, but normally in Thailand, I think it is a good example for the pilot project, because our project achieved for the EV charger around 80 EV charger to initiate any other EV charger in Thailand. But in case of EV charger, so most of EV charger are in department store, because maybe more than 50% they are in the department store. So that's why I think the adoption of EV charger, I think it's necessary to place in the place where many people use or apply in. And in case of any other place that is important for the charging point, the adoption for charging point is concerned about the hotel condominium. So in Thailand, there are the building rules for the parking lot, because normally the condominium or hotel or any place that concerned about many people are the parking lot. Only the vehicle for the parking lot for vehicle, not EV. But in this present, they have the building rule for the EV parking lot in the building in this present. So I think this is the rule for the new mobility in Thailand. And also I think in any other country also support about the parking lot or any other infrastructure for EV as well. This is the promotion or support for the EV driver or EV interested, because if someone need to use EV or use the infrastructure, EV infrastructure, they try to apply, they try to use with the convenient, right? Yeah. So that's why I think it's necessary to concern about the factor of EV application, and also the business model, because in Thailand, not only the place, the home place, the hotel, the condominium, but also in any other business model, they try to apply the EV charger in any business. For example, in case of the small restaurant, the small coffee shop, something, they try to install the EV charger in front of their shop to pull out the EV driver. I think this is like a business model for the future mobility.
Dan, what about you? Is there something that we're missing? Obviously, you're an EV driver. So what we're missing for the infrastructure, what we're not doing properly, and I fully take on board the point of charge points not operating when you get there, because there's nothing worse for me. I drove home from London, which was an 8-hour journey, which became a 10-hour journey because charge points didn't operate when I got there. So yeah, that's a given. We need to have more uptime on those public charge points. So is there anything else that's missing there from the adoption of that infrastructure?
I think my perspective is probably slightly philosophical rather than practical. You know, I'm not at the hard edge of infrastructure delivery. That's not what I do. But I think it's about common purpose and collaboration. I think if there's something that I consistently see through the conversations that I have, either with leaders at kind of OEM level or micro mobility businesses, or even charging and infrastructure businesses, I think there is a shared understanding that what we're trying to do is difficult, it's complex, and the only way in which we can really do that is by probably collaborating more deeply and in a slightly different way than we've ever done before. And so I suppose my request is that actually, I'm sure there are some functional things that could be done differently, but I think it's about making sure that stakeholder groups have a kind of shared vision and a shared purpose, and are more collaborative in solving big problems. And I think that has to be the approach for ecosystem change, because otherwise it's too difficult for and it's too complex for any one group to do. So I kind of go for a philosophical view of greater levels of collaboration and openness, because I think that's how we solve big problems.
Yeah, and I feel like, Ian, I think that the market is mostly getting to that position where we've seen standardization of charging plugs, which was great. Can you imagine if we had maintained a market where every car had a different variation of charging plugs? So yeah, I think there is a level of collaboration there, and certainly more to do. And Akin, any thoughts on what can we do better? How do we resolve the issue of people not wanting to purchase an EV because they feel as though the infrastructure isn't in place?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think out here there's loads of things that could be done differently to encourage EV take-up, not all of them infrastructure related. I mean, the obvious one here is that the fuel is so cheap, or these fossil fuels are so cheap, that of course the pricing advantage of having an EV, or the cost advantage of having an EV, is probably a lot less than somewhere else in the world. But from an infrastructure perspective, I think there's a real opportunity here, which is that the pace of development here, whether that's business or commercial or whatever, is probably a lot higher than other places in the world, and particularly higher than the developed countries of the world. You know, you're seeing lots of new developments going in, and what I would like to see is developers being mandated to include EV infrastructure into those developments. I mean, it's only recently that they've started to mandate parking as part of these developments. Previously, that wasn't a requirement. It's starting to become one now. And if you're going to mandate parking, why don't you mandate EV infrastructure at the same time as well? And I think that would be one of the major things that would give people confidence and drive people's ability to feel like wherever they go, there's an EV charging point that they can use.
Yeah, well, we're fairly fortunate in the UK. We are seeing those issues being mandated now. So for things like new housing developments in the UK, it's mandated that those houses will at very least be EV ready if they don't have the charger. So we are taking steps towards that. From our point of view at CITA, we very much have our finger on the pulse of this, given the fact that we manufacture the equipment that goes into that infrastructure. I think we firmly believe that different regions will have a different solution. AC charging will be very popular in the UK because we have an aging grid infrastructure, and we need to be cautious and aware of the fact that we just can't put DC chargers everywhere. We can't have 50 and 150 kilowatt chargers everywhere. And for us, I think a big factor has to be education, which will play partly into what you do, Dan, because we need to educate the public to say you don't have to charge in 1 hour, depending on how you're using your vehicle. So can you charge at the office at a slower pace? Can you charge at home at a slower pace? I think most vehicles, so the average private car in the UK does less than 200 miles per week. So on that basis, really, we're looking at a single charge per week for the adoption of most EVs right now. So trying to educate people to say, don't worry about charging, it's available. You don't have to charge 4 or 5 times per week if you're only doing those 200 miles. But realistically, putting more chargers in more locations. So it may be that it takes us slightly longer to leave that charging location. But if you're like Dan and have got lots of time in your hands to charge nice and slowly today, and I can certainly relate to that. So we try very much to charge our own vehicles on AC chargers and not necessarily just rely on DC. So certainly for us, I think it's having a bit more of a holistic approach to say we need DC chargers. We completely agree with that. But can we educate EV owners and potential EV owners or EV users to think about how they need to charge? Do they really need to charge at a really fast rate, or can they charge at that slightly slow rate? For a typical example would be a hotel. There's absolutely no point in a hotel relying on fast DC charging, and we have to get out of our bed in the middle of the night to move our car off the charger. We want to pull into a hotel car park. We want to charge overnight. We park at 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night, and we want to drive away in the morning with a fully charged vehicle. Now, even that is only a 7 kilowatt charger. it's a fairly slow charge. So I think finding that right mix of balance between the rapid charging on the DC side and the fast charging on the AC. So I don't know if anyone else has anything that they'd like to close off. I think we're pretty much about bang on time for the panel discussion. I'd just like to congratulate not only you guys here, but everyone that's presented today. So the presentations have been fantastic, and we're certainly looking forward to some more tomorrow. Do you guys have anything that you want to add before we close? No,
thank you very much.
I think maybe we'll, as following with everyone else's presentation, we can maybe open up the floor to some questions. I'm kind of conscious that we may not be flooded with questions at this time, but we'll be happy to take anyone's questions, I'm sure. Either come off mute or type your questions in the chat box.